Hi, I'm Stock Investor Davis. Welcome to the channel. In this video, we'll discuss the latest news on CRISPR, the biggest news being the FDA approval of Casgevy, a short-term financial forecast based on the news, a long-term financial forecast, and then close with a technical analysis. If you want to share a thought or ask a question along the way, let me know in the comments. Please like and subscribe. Starting off, the FDA has approved Casgevy. Woohoo! So the Vertex CRISPR therapy has a US list price of $2.2 million, while Bluebird, its competitor, has a similar therapy, or I guess a similar result in therapy, with $3.1 million. So this is another advantage for the CRISPR Vertex deal. Both of these therapies are pitched as a one-time treatment and will be available in early 2024, so right away. Patients must have stem cells harvested from their bone marrow. The cells are then sent to the manufacturing facilities where they are edited using CRISPR's Cas9 technology. Once the cells are incubated, they are infused back into the patient during a month-long hospital stay. To expand upon that timeline for treatment for Casgevy, first the blood stem cells are collected. The entire process may happen more than once. And just that collection piece, each time it can take up to 1 week. Once those are collected, it may then take up to 6 months from that time for your cells to be collected and then to go to the manufacturer and test Casgevy before it is sent back to the healthcare provider. Then, once everything's been kind of reestablished, they will then infuse those Casgevy updated cells back into the person, which at that point you might stay in the hospital for an estimated 4 to 6 weeks. Times may vary, and they'll closely monitor your recovery. Moving on to the market for Casgevy, Vertex is estimating that there are about 25,000 people in the US and Europe who are eligible for this. Moving on to sales, what are the experts saying in terms of sales? So Vertex is already cautioning us, the investors, to expect uptake to be slow. Bloomberg has a consensus estimate that sales aren't expected to reach $1 billion until 2027. 3 years after the approval, peak sales are projected to be in 2030 and beyond, and could rise to more than $2.2 billion per year. Additionally, a few other quick points to note. We have CRISPR slashing its staff by 10%. Now, I'm imagining that this is potentially external staff that was brought on in order to help Casgevy get approved. Now that it's been approved, the company can now trim that extra staff. And then the other piece is Vertex and CRISPR are looking to build as many as 75 of their own centers across the US and the European Union. Those aren't going to be cheap, and to build or maintain, as they're staffed by skilled healthcare workers. We'll see how this plays out, especially in the near term. Moving on to our short-term projections, we can see up top that the company has become eligible to receive this future payment of $200 million. The milestone is upon receipt of Vertex of the first marketing approval of the initial product candidate from the FDA or the European Commission. As we know, the FDA has now approved it. And so in terms of a short-term projection, what we're seeing is there's that anticipated $200 million in collaboration revenue. And so if we just kind of simplify this fourth quarter for 2023, they will now have that $200 million in revenue. We're projecting about $130 million in expenses. Take that out, that leaves us with roughly $70 million in net profit. If we divide that by the shares, that's going to give the investors about 88 cents earnings per share. We'll see how accurate that ends up being. Pushing ahead with our forecast beyond this next quarter, first we recall that Vertex's estimates for the population for Casgevy would be 25,000 people in the US and Europe who are eligible for this treatment. So if we take those 25,000 people, multiply that by the $2.2 million cost for treatment, That gives us a total addressable market of $55 billion in revenue. We're then going to factor in the Bloomberg estimates that state $1 billion potentially in revenue in 2027. And then in 2030, potentially total sales would be about 2.2 billion. So in the bottom left corner, we have a total sales forecast with those two benchmark figures, with the $1 billion in 2027 and then $2.2 billion in 2030. So we just more or less do a straight line estimate where it goes from 250 million in this first year, 2024, potentially doubling to 500 million in 2025, up until the 1 billion in 2027. Then it kind of picks up a little bit, ultimately reaching that 2.2 billion figure in 2030. So to start off, I mean, if we break it down by people, it's really going to start off very slow based on what we're seeing here, with this first year potentially 114 people. So this gives us the potential that it might move a lot quicker than that. I would imagine it would, but of course we'll have to just wait and see. But over 7 years, based on these projections, they're more or less saying that about 3,592 people are going to receive treatment of that 25,000. So I guess I'm really just factoring the cost here, because that would be the only reason why they wouldn't treat more people. It's just not achievable potentially. Next, we need to recall the CRISPR deal with Vertex, which states the initial collaboration agreement in 2015 with Vertex is going to focus on multiple treatments, one of which is this sickle cell disease. And the deal more or less says that Vertex and CRISPR will have a 60-40 split of its net profits and losses, where CRISPR receives 40% of those net profit or loss. We then will factor in what is Vertex's profit margin, because again, it's not total revenue, it's the net profit or loss. So if we look at Vertex's 2023 revenue compared to its income from operations through the first 9 months of 2023 and 2022, that's going to give us a ballpark range of what we might be able to see in terms of what CRISPR will receive once the year kind of goes through. So for 2023, we can see Vertex's profit margin was about 38.7%, and then in 2022, it was all the way up to 49.3%. So we're going to take those two figures, and that will give us a range for CRISPR's ultimate revenue down the road. Continuing to the next step to get us the profitability forecast, we're taking two pieces that we discussed earlier, which is that sales forecast in the top left, and then we have the Vertex profit margin in the top right from our previous slides. And that's going to give us the Vertex profitability forecast range for those 6 to 7 years in advance, where, for example, in 2024, we're projecting that $250 million in sales. Then we're going to times it by the low, which would be that 38.7% profit, all the way up to the high, which could be 49.3% profit, ultimately giving us a profitability range of between about $96 million to $123 million in net profit. And then, of course, as it kind of builds out, potentially by 2030, we could see a range of $850 million up to $1 billion in net profit. Of course, we'll have to see how it all plays out and potentially update as we go. Now, with the profitability forecast, we can now estimate CRISPR's revenue forecast. So up at the top, we just are taking what we just recently calculated, that Vertex profitability forecast and those ranges. We then have to factor in that deal, which was that 60-40 split, CRISPR receiving the 40% of that. So we're just going to take our ranges from up top, multiply them all by 40% to give us CRISPR's revenue range. So not as great as I think a lot of people might have anticipated. So to give us an example, 2024, we're going to take that roughly 100 million to about 125 million in Vertex profitability, multiply that by that 40%. Ultimately, CRISPR's revenue would be about $38 to $50 million for that first year of treatment availability. And then possibly during what Bloomberg considers the peak potentially in 2030, CRISPR would potentially receive about $340 million up to $432 million in a year. One last question before our technical analysis. What will it take for CRISPR to break even with this treatment? So up at the top, we're just going to start off with a simple calculation here. We have the $2.2 million per treatment. We realize that there might be, just to keep it simple, a 40% profitability for Vertex. Then we have to take CRISPR's revenue portion, which would be multiplying it by another 40%, ultimately giving us about $352,000 per treatment, and that would be CRISPR's revenue per treatment. We then can look at CRISPR's 9 months so far in 2023, which is roughly $462 million. If we just divide that by 3, then remultiply it by the 4 quarters, that's going to give us about $600 million in total expenses for CRISPR this year. So if we take $600 million in total expenses, divide it by that $352,000 in revenue per treatment, that means about 1,705 people they would need to treat each year for them to break even. And based on that sales forecast, which we've included on the bottom right, they are very far away. I'm hoping that they're able to treat people faster than this projection, but based on this, it's not going to be as quickly impactful as I think a lot of people initially thought, especially me. I thought it was going to move a lot faster than this, but of course we'll see what actually happens. These are just estimates at this time. And then we just also included the note that treating that 1,705 people, that's only about 1 to 2% of the US population that needs treatment. Consensus is about 100,000 people have this sickle cell disease. And then if you even factor in Vertex's estimate of about 25,000 that they feel that they can treat, this is only about 6 to 7%. So very small number. So I'm hoping that this kind of gets up higher, but that we'll see. Finally, our technical analysis for CRISPR, currently $58. We see the price continues to trade primarily between $45 and $71. It's been doing this since November 2021, and occasionally it will reach highs of 85 and lows of 38 within that same time frame. While in the short-term projection, the company will see profitability probably for just this upcoming quarter. In the long term, the company is far from profitable. Currently, I'm okay with the price, but ideally, I would want to pick this one up and buy it at $45 or less, given the previous support points. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.